Hello, Mike from Canavan Wealth. Welcome back. I've been interested in kind of educating myself about immigration lately. I read a very interesting chapter in a book about the economic impacts of immigration, and it's so politically charged these days, and it's something clients bring up a lot that I thought it was finally time that I kind of educate myself around the facts and what's really going on as best as I can understand it. And then I thought I should, I'll do a video, kind of share my findings with everyone. I'm going to try and keep this as apolitical as possible, which is impossible in today's climate. But all of these, the graphics I've chose to use are, I think, the best, clearest ones, but I've kind of verified a lot of the numbers generally from the Customs and Border Patrol website. It's excellent. They've got all sorts of great data. This is actually from Pew Research, I think another pretty reliable resource for data. This is monthly migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border since 2000. This graph shocked me in so many different ways. I think there's so much interesting information. Now, we're going to interpret this data a little bit from some other data, with some other data from the Customs and Border Patrol. But it shocked me that from 2000 into the teens that encounters at the U.S. border at the southern border were actually going down. And then it shocked me that very recently they are as high as they are. This has been a topic since at least back to the debates in the 2016, 2017 election, where Trump famously, made the U.S. border a big issue, which from a timing standpoint, I was so surprised to see that it was actually down, right? Encounters were actually down at the time. I can't imagine he was seeing into the future to see this spike. We're going to talk about why this spike is going on, or, why, what I learned about it. But it was actually kind of at a low point and had been coming down. And that's not due to, funding. If we look at, this is funding. So this is 2000. This is where that graph starts. Funding for the Border Patrol has been going up pretty steadily. Been some flattened off periods. This is Trump funding it fairly well. So that's that. But I think before we look more into this, I want to talk about kind of the broad geopolitics that's going on here, and that's looking at world population. So I did a recent video on world population and how it's probably not changing the way you think it is, and all sorts of drivers there. I'll try not to repeat as much there, but that's a great video if you want to go look at it. So here in the US, population is about 330. Canada's around 38. Put together, we're about 370. Now I'm going to jump to this little dashboard. So the other 130 out of this 507 for North America is Mexico, because they branch Central America off here. But if you took all of South America and all of Central America, they're smaller than Canada, the US, and Mexico combined. I think that would probably surprise most people. I think a lot of people who have concerns about immigration view South and Central America as this massive population of underprivileged that all want to come here. If they literally all came today, the population would double, which would certainly be, probably more than we could handle. But it's not like this huge, population pool that's pouring into the country. So then if you start looking at the actual crossings of the border, those encounters, 2.4 million this year, up from 1.7 the year before, 458,000 in 2020. Now, of course, this is COVID, but the numbers get smaller before that. As we try and interpret these numbers, this is very clearly an issue, though, right? You don't see numbers like this. It's very hard to say that there's something else other than a lot more people showing up to the U.S. border. So what's causing that? I think this article was really good. It's from CBS News. All media is biased. If you hate CBS News, I guess you can turn the channel off. I don't really care about them one way or the other. I don't prescribe to their news brand very frequently, but I thought this article was good. The number one thing that's causing this, or not the number one of the things that's causing them is where they're coming from. It used to be most of the immigrants coming from the south border were from Mexico. They're now coming from South and Central America in addition to immigrants coming up from Mexico. And that's a lot of due to geopolitical insecurity down there. They're going through a lot of tough times with politics and elections and things and all sorts of persecution. You can see this dark blue line is, effectively the number of other nationalities other than Mexico that are immigrating to the United States. The other thing, if you want to kind of look at this accurately, is that effectively, because of Title 42, which is a pandemic era policy that allowed us to quickly expel people during the pandemic, since we're quickly expelling people, a lot of them are becoming repeat offenders. Effectively, we're catching them 2, 3, 4 times trying to cross the border. So that number of 2.4 million should be lower if you counted unique individuals. And those numbers are out there, but you have to balance between whether you're going to look at unique individuals or encounters, right? Because the job of Customs and Border is to deal with the encounters, not the unique individuals. So the numbers would be a little bit lower recently. They're effectively exacerbated by Title 42. This makes news a lot. You see this in political groups or propaganda, the fact that Biden expels more people from Title 42 than Trump did. Used for both positive and negative reasons. That is true, but that's because of how many people are showing up to the border right now. You could kind of see here it's about 50% are being expelled under Title 42, whereas back in the Trump administration, it was a lot more as a percentage being expelled due to that. So is there a backlog too? Because effectively we're expelling so many that creates more people trying to cross today because there's a better percentage chance that they're not going to be expelled in Title 42. I'm sure it all works into it. And then the last one here is effectively the detection rate. So this is saying that according to U.S. Customs and Border Control, they expected, they thought back in 2000 that they were catching about 43% of the people. They were detecting that they were trying to cross. And that is up to as much as they thought 90% in 2019 and 66% in 2022. So effectively the number of people, the percentage of people that we're detecting crossing has gotten better. So if you go back to this chart, these numbers should have been higher in the past. Now these would be a little bit higher too if you counted total number of attempted crossings. But I don't think it entirely, would smush this down to make this look normal, even if you include everything from a backlog from Title 42, multiple crossings per person, detection rate. I think you're going to see, because of the geopolitical conditions right now in Southern and South America, that we are going through substantial challenges. Now, if you look at it from a population standpoint and say, okay, so 2.4 million people cross. If you take into account undetected crossings, that's about 3 million. If you then back it off to the number of people being expelled from Title 42, a number of people who are just sent back for normal reasons, you could say that maybe 2 million people are taking up residence in the U.S. each year. That's ours in Canada, because many of them do end up in Canada, and Canada's a relatively small population. So you'd say that's about a 0.5% rise in population every year, which you remember we're growing at about 0.6 from the population dashboard, which I'll come to in a minute. So, but I think that would be surprising for most people to realize that it's not like we're having this giant deluge. Now to Texas, that I think is about 30 to 36 million in population, that's a big deal, right? 2 million people showing up in a state with 30 million people in it is a substantial reason. If I were the governor of Texas, I'd be freaking out too. So, we're probably not doing a very good job of that. But to think over, if this were to stay the same as it is today for the next 10 years, population would rise by about 5% in the country. Now, population itself, we looked at. Now let's look at population change, because like I just said, the rate of population in the U.S. is about 0.6%. It's going to load here in a minute. And that is not all that different. This is a color-coded map, right? See, South America, Central America, they're not growing any bigger than us. So it's not that they're growing dramatically fast. However, we're growing at 0.5%. It's important that populations continue to grow for economic reasons, now for sustainability reasons, and if you just don't like more people being around, I can understand you might be resistant to it, but I'm a financial advisor. I worry about economic things. Slowing populations like you're seeing in China can have devastating impacts on their economies. But let's look at total fertility rate. This is how many kids is your average female having in the country. If it was 2, then the population would stay the same, all other things considered. If there's no immigration and there was no change in life expectancy, population change would be 0% if every woman had 2 kids on average. Married with 1.8. So this further supports that if we did not have immigration, our population would be getting smaller. And again, you see there's not a big difference between North America and South America. It's not like Africa or some parts of Asia where fertility rates are really, really high and growth is particularly high. So, I think it's like everything. It's a story. It's a two-sided story. Is there a problem at the southern border? After doing the research I've done, almost undoubtedly. We are seeing a record number of crossings at the U.S. border, and the southern states are probably having a really hard time dealing with it. Now, the economic impact of that, I think most people would be very, very surprised on what the research says from an economic standpoint. But from a law enforcement standpoint, it is undoubtedly a problem. At the same time, immigration is really important to America for economic reasons, right? If you think that immigration is hurting us from an economic standpoint, I would tell you to look into that, and you will probably realize that we rely on immigration for lots of good economic outcomes. And I will do videos on that in the future, I promise. So I wish I had better conclusions as to what should be done, how we could better sort this out. But for me, I'm really still in the process of learning about what's going on with the immigration problem so that I can make better educated choices when I read articles. I know this didn't have a whole lot to do with your retirement savings or anything, but I thought people might find it interesting. And I do talk about current events and immigration with a lot of different clients. So thank you for your time. I hope you learned something here, and I will talk to you soon.